The ballroom glittered like a palace. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of smiling guests. Soft violin music floated through the air. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter echoed from every corner of the room. Everyone looked beautiful. Everyone looked happy. Except me. My hands trembled as I carried a silver tray through the crowd. The black waitress uniform hung loosely on my thin, exhausted body. My shoes ached with every step, and my eyes burned from holding back tears that refused to stay buried. Because standing at the center of the ballroom, smiling proudly beside another woman, was my husband, Daniel. The man who once held my hands and promised, forever. The man who kissed my forehead when I was sick. The man who swore he would never leave me. And yet, 8 months ago, he vanished from my life without warning. No goodbye. No explanation. Nothing. Then, somehow, the world was told that I was dead. Dead. As if my existence could simply be erased like chalk from a blackboard. And tonight, my husband was marrying someone else. I lowered my head quickly, my heartbeat pounding violently inside my chest. Please don't recognize me. Please. But fate can be cruel. And tonight, fate was watching me closely. Only a few minutes later, the bride turned toward me. At first, her smile was polite, distracted. Then suddenly, her face lost all color. Her lips parted. Her eyes dropped to the necklace around my neck. The silver necklace Daniel once clasped around my throat with trembling fingers. The necklace, he whispered, was one of a kind. The necklace he claimed belonged only to his wife. To me. The bride slowly lifted her shaking hand toward her own chest, because hanging around her neck was the exact same necklace. For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to disappear. The music faded. The laughter blurred. Even the air felt heavy. Her eyes met mine again, confused, terrified, searching. And then, barely above a whisper, she asked, "Who are you?" The tray nearly slipped from my trembling fingers. A champagne glass rattled violently against the silver surface. My throat tightened. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream. But the pain sitting inside my chest for 8 long months wrapped itself around my voice like chains. Around us, the wedding continued. Guests laughed loudly. Someone toasted to true love. The violinists played another romantic melody. But deep inside me, something dark finally woke up. Not sadness. Not heartbreak. Something far more dangerous. Because the broken woman Daniel abandoned was gone. And tonight, standing inside the glittering ballroom where my husband prepared to marry another woman while pretending I was dead, I finally understood the truth. Tonight was no longer their wedding. Tonight was the beginning of my revenge. 8 months earlier, rain poured heavily outside the small apartment window. Not soft rain. Not peaceful rain. This rain sounded angry, violent, endless. I sat quietly on the couch, staring at the unpaid bills spread across the table. Electricity, rent, hospital debt. Every paper felt heavier than the last, like each bill carried another piece of my broken life. Then the apartment door opened. Daniel walked in wearing an expensive gray suit I had never seen before. His cologne smelled unfamiliar too. Sweet, sharp, expensive. Nothing about him felt familiar anymore. Everything about him had changed lately. The late nights, the hidden phone calls, the coldness, the silence, the way he barely looked at me anymore. I looked up slowly. "Did you eat?" I asked softly. He loosened his tie without looking at me. "I already ate." My chest tightened instantly. Again. Alone again. I forced a weak smile anyway. "I saved dinner for you." I said I already ate. His sharp tone sliced through the room like glass. I lowered my eyes quickly. The old Daniel would have apologized immediately. The old Daniel would have kissed my forehead, pulled me close, Asked about my day. But that version of my husband had disappeared months ago. Maybe forever. I stood quietly and carried the untouched food back to the kitchen. My hands trembled as I washed the dishes. Then suddenly, I heard his phone vibrate. A woman's laughter echoed faintly through the speaker. Soft, playful, intimate. Then Daniel laughed too. A laugh I had not heard in months. A real laugh. Warm. Alive. I froze completely. Water continued running over my trembling fingers. That was the exact moment my heart finally accepted the truth. There was another woman. And somehow, deep down, I think I had already known. But love can make intelligent women become prisoners of hope. That night, I lay awake while Daniel slept beside me. His back faced me. Cold. Distant. Like even in sleep he wanted space between us. I stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering when exactly our marriage started dying. Maybe it began after my miscarriage. Maybe after his promotion. Maybe after we became poor. Or maybe Daniel had never truly loved me at all. That thought hurt the most. The next morning, he left early. The apartment became silent again. Painfully silent. But then I noticed something hanging from the chair. His second phone. Forgotten inside his jacket pocket. My stomach tightened. Daniel never forgot that phone. Never. I stared at it for several seconds. My heart pounding harder. 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 Then finally, I grabbed it. My hands shook violently as I unlocked the screen. One message appeared immediately. From a woman named Vanessa. Tomorrow night was magical. I can't wait. 3 months later, I stood inside the employee locker room of the Grand Bellagio Hotel, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. My face looked thinner, paler, older somehow, like heartbreak had stolen years from my life. People say time changes people, but pain changes them faster. I tied my black apron carefully around my waist, trying to ignore the tight knot inside my chest. Around me, waitresses hurried between lockers while soft music echoed faintly from the ballroom downstairs. Everyone looked busy, focused, normal, and there I was, trying to remember how to breathe. Beside me, another waitress smiled kindly. "You're Elena, right?" I looked up quickly and nodded. She extended her hand warmly. "I'm Rosa." There was kindness in her eyes. Real kindness. The kind I hadn't seen in months. She handed me a silver tray. "Tonight's event is huge," she said. "Rich people. Politicians. Millionaires. So smile even if your feet feel like they're dying." I forced a weak smile. "Thanks." Rosa laughed softly. "Trust me. After 3 hours carrying champagne, your soul leaves your body." I almost smiled for real. Almost. But the second she walked away, reality came crashing back again. Working at a luxury hotel was never supposed to be my life. Before everything collapsed, I was an art teacher. I used to spend mornings painting with children. Tiny hands covered in bright colors. Little voices laughing. I loved painting. I loved teaching. I loved life. Back then, my biggest worry was whether my students would spill paint on the classroom floor. Then came the miscarriage. Then the hospital debt. Then Daniel started changing. Slowly at first. Then completely. And suddenly, survival became more important than dreams. "Everyone ready?" The manager shouted from across the room. "Yes, sir," everyone answered together. We lined up quickly. The manager adjusted his tie nervously before speaking again. "Tonight's wedding is extremely important. The groom comes from a powerful family. No mistakes." I barely listened. My mind drifted somewhere else. Until suddenly, he said the groom's name. Daniel Whitmore. My entire body froze instantly. The tray nearly slipped from my hands. No, no, Not Daniel. Not my Daniel. The room suddenly felt too small. Too hot. Too loud. I could hear my heartbeat pounding violently inside my ears. Rosa touched my shoulder. You okay? I nodded quickly. Too quickly. But I could barely breathe. The manager continued talking, unaware my entire world had just shattered again. The bride is Vanessa Lauron, daughter of billionaire investor Richard Lauron. Vanessa. The woman from the messages. The woman whose voice I heard laughing through Daniel's phone. The woman who helped destroy my marriage. My stomach twisted painfully. I should have walked away right then. I should have removed the apron. Quit the job. Gone home. Cried until morning. But something stopped me. Maybe anger. Maybe curiosity. Maybe fate. Or maybe part of me needed to see the truth with my own eyes. That evening, guests flooded into the ballroom like royalty entering a palace. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above hundreds of smiling faces. Diamonds glittered around women's necks. Expensive perfumes filled the air. Soft violin music floated through the room. Everyone looked beautiful. Everyone looked happy. And the waitresses moved silently through the crowd like invisible ghosts. Serving drinks. Clearing plates. Smiling politely, while rich people ignored our existence. I lowered my eyes and carried champagne carefully between the guests. Then suddenly, I saw him. Daniel. Standing near the center of the ballroom wearing a white tuxedo. Perfectly tailored. Perfectly confident. Perfectly happy. He was smiling. Actually smiling. Like our 10 years together had never happened. Like the nights I cried beside him meant nothing. Like the child we lost meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. My chest burned so badly I thought I might collapse right there in front of everyone. For one terrifying second, I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at the man I once loved more than myself. And then something hurt even more than the betrayal. Daniel looked different. Not physically. Emotionally. Lighter. Freer. Like losing me had improved his life. That realization shattered something inside me. Because, while I was drowning in pain, he was celebrating. I watched him wrap his arm around Vanessa's waist. She laughed softly at something he whispered. The same laugh I once thought belonged only to me. Tears burned behind my eyes. But I forced them back. Not here. Not in front of these people. Not in front of him. Then Daniel looked up suddenly. For one horrifying second, our eyes almost met. I turned away quickly, gripping the tray so tightly my fingers hurt. My breathing became uneven. He couldn't recognize me. Not like this. Not wearing a waitress uniform. Not after throwing me away like I never mattered. But deep inside, a strange feeling began growing slowly inside my chest. Not sadness. Not heartbreak. Something darker. Something dangerous. Because as I stood there watching my husband prepare to marry another woman, I realized something important. Daniel thought my story was over. He thought I disappeared quietly. Broken. Defeated. Forgotten. But he was wrong. Terribly wrong. And before this wedding night ended, everything was about to change.
For a 5-minute YouTube narration, you should aim for approximately 650 to 750 words, depending on narration speed. The version above is closer to 8 to 10 minutes. Here's a tightened version that keeps the emotion, suspense, and dramatic punctuation while fitting a 5-minute storytelling format. Chapter 3: The Necklace. The ceremony had not started yet. Golden light from the crystal chandeliers spilled across the ballroom. Soft violin music floated through the air. Champagne glasses sparkled. Laughter echoed from every corner of the room. To everyone else, it looked like a perfect wedding. A perfect love story. A perfect beginning. But I knew the truth. This wedding had been built on lies. And those lies were about to collapse. My hands trembled as I carried a silver tray through the crowd. I kept my eyes lowered, careful not to look at Daniel. Not yet. Not before I was ready. Not before the truth came out. Then I saw her. Vanessa. The bride. Beautiful. Elegant. confident. Her white gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers. Her smile was radiant. She looked like a woman living inside a fairy tale. For a moment, my chest tightened. Because once upon a time, that woman had been me. Happy, hopeful, certain that the man beside me would love me forever. But fairy tales built on lies always become nightmares. As I passed near her table, Vanessa suddenly turned toward me. Her eyes locked onto mine. I froze. A strange expression crossed her face. Confusion, recognition, fear. Then she stood slowly. Wait. My heart stopped. The tray felt heavier in my hands. Vanessa stared directly at my neck. At the silver moon pendant hanging there. The necklace Daniel had given me on our 5th wedding anniversary. The necklace I never removed. Slowly, Vanessa lifted her hand to her own neck. My stomach dropped. Because hanging there was the exact same necklace. The exact same pendant. The exact same chain. The exact same lie. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Where did you get that?" Before I could answer, another voice interrupted. "What's wrong?" "Daniel." The sound of his voice sent a chill through me. Vanessa pointed at me. Her finger trembled. "She has my necklace." Daniel looked at me casually at first, like I was just another waitress. Then his eyes met mine. Everything changed. The color drained from his face. His body froze. The tray slipped from my hands. Crash. Champagne glasses shattered across the marble floor. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Conversation stopped. Music faded. Every head turned toward us. Daniel stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. His lips parted. Then he whispered, "Elena." The ballroom fell silent. Vanessa looked between us. Confused. "What is happening?" Daniel rushed forward and grabbed my arm. Hard. Pain shot through my shoulder. His voice dropped into a desperate whisper. "You're supposed to be gone. Gone. Not divorced. Not separated. Gone." The word cut deeper than any knife ever could. Vanessa stepped backward. Her face had turned completely pale. "What do you mean, gone?" Daniel said nothing. Because he couldn't. The truth was standing right in front of him. Alive. Breathing. Impossible to hide. For months, I had imagined this moment. I had imagined screaming at him, demanding answers, making him suffer the way I had suffered. But standing there now, I felt strangely calm. The fear was gone. Only truth remained. I turned toward Vanessa. She deserved to know, even if it shattered her entire world. I looked directly into her eyes. Then I whispered, "I'm his wife." Gasps exploded around the room. Someone dropped a glass. Guests immediately began whispering. What did she say? His wife. Vanessa's mother stood so quickly her chair nearly fell over. What? Daniel released my arm. "Elena, stop this." Stop this? As if I was the problem. As if I was the one who lied. As if I was the one pretending my spouse was dead. I looked straight at him. My voice shook with years of pain. "You told her I was dead?" Vanessa's eyes widened. "Dead?" Tears burned behind my eyes. "He abandoned me after 10 years of marriage." The room erupted with whispers. Daniel looked around desperately. Panic filled his face. "Please, not here. Not here. Of course not here. Because lies hate witnesses. And tonight, there were hundreds of them." Vanessa slowly removed the engagement ring from her finger. The diamond sparkled beneath the chandelier. Then she looked at Daniel. Not with love. Not with admiration. But with horror. "You told me your wife died in an apartment fire." Daniel opened his mouth. No words came out. No explanation. No excuse. No lie. For the first time in months, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. And as the perfect wedding began to fall apart around him, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. And Daniel was finally about to face the consequences of every lie he had ever told. The wedding stopped immediately. The violinists lowered their instruments. Conversations died. Laughter vanished. The entire ballroom seemed frozen in shock. Guests gathered in whispering circles. Phones appeared everywhere. People recorded. People stared. People waited. Because everyone knew they were witnessing something far bigger than a ruined wedding. At the center of it all stood Daniel. Pale. Sweating. Terrified. And for the first time in his life, he couldn't control the story. Then a sharp voice cut through the silence. "What is going on here?" Daniel's mother, Margaret Whitmore, stormed across the ballroom. Her expensive heels struck the marble floor like gunshots. Her face was red with fury. Her eyes darted between me and Daniel. Vanessa immediately pointed at me. She says she's Daniel's wife. The moment Margaret looked at me, something changed. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. Instant recognition. Her face lost color. Her lips trembled. Elena, she whispered. I stared at her coldly. No fear. No respect. No forgiveness. You remember me now? A painful silence followed. Because Margaret had always remembered me. She simply wished she hadn't. From the day Daniel introduced me to his family, she hated me. I came from a poor neighborhood. My father worked 2 jobs. My mother cleaned houses. Meanwhile, the Whitmores lived in luxury. Private schools. Private jets. Private clubs. To Margaret, I was never a daughter-in-law. I was an embarrassment. A mistake. A temporary inconvenience that she expected Daniel to correct. Margaret forced a smile. The kind people wear when they're panicking. There's obviously some confusion. I laughed bitterly. No. The room went silent again. There are lies. Vanessa slowly turned toward Daniel. The tears in her eyes were becoming impossible to hide. You married me while still married to her? Daniel rubbed his forehead. His entire body looked exhausted. It isn't that simple. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. Then her voice rose. Not that simple? She pointed directly at me. You told me she was dead. Gasps spread through the crowd. Several guests covered their mouths. Others exchanged horrified looks. The scandal was becoming impossible to contain. Margaret quickly stepped forward. Vanessa, darling, perhaps we should discuss this privately. But Vanessa pulled away. Hard. No. Her voice echoed across the ballroom. I want answers now. The room fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The tension was unbearable. Then a new voice interrupted. Deep. Calm. Powerful. She deserves the truth. Every head turned. A tall, elderly man stepped forward from the crowd. Richard Laurent. Vanessa's father. One of the most powerful businessmen in the country. A billionaire. A man whose approval could build empires. Or destroy them. His cold eyes studied everyone carefully. Especially Daniel. The moment Daniel saw him approaching, fear flashed across his face. Richard stopped beside Vanessa. Then he turned toward me. For several seconds he simply observed. Not judging. Not accusing. Just listening. Then he asked quietly, How long were you married to him? My throat tightened. The memories hurt. But I answered. 10 years. The ballroom became even quieter. 10 years. A decade. An entire life. Richard nodded slowly. Then he looked at Daniel. So the rumors were true. Daniel's jaw tightened immediately. What rumors? Vanessa asked. Richard's expression darkened. The answer seemed to pain him. That Daniel had a habit of pursuing vulnerable women. The crowd leaned closer. Listening. Waiting. And abandoning them when wealthier opportunities appeared. The room exploded with whispers. Margaret immediately snapped. That's ridiculous. But Richard ignored her completely. His eyes never left Daniel. Instead, he looked at me. And for the first time that night, someone looked at me with kindness. Not pity. Not suspicion. Kindness. Did he hurt you? The question hit me harder than I expected. Because nobody had asked me that. Not in 8 months. Not after being abandoned. Not after being erased. Not after being declared dead. My vision blurred. Emotion flooded my chest. And finally, I whispered the truth. Yes. Richard closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Then he revealed something that changed everything. Daniel approached my daughter 6 months before separating from you. Vanessa froze. The color drained from her face. What? Richard continued. Every word felt like another bomb exploding. He knew our family company was preparing a billion-dollar merger. The crowd gasped. Vanessa stared at Daniel. Horrified. Heartbroken. You pursued me for money? Daniel looked around desperately. Like a trapped animal searching for an escape. Then something inside him finally broke. His face twisted with frustration. Anger. Defeat. And suddenly he shouted. Everyone uses everyone. The ballroom erupted. Guests shouted. Questions flew through the air. Phones continued recording. The wedding had transformed into a public disaster. But the biggest shock was still waiting. Because suddenly, enough. Margaret's scream silenced the entire room. Everyone turned toward her. Her face looked different now. Not angry. Not arrogant. Terrified. Pure terror. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing was uneven. She looked like a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. Then her eyes locked onto mine. Pleading. Desperate. Afraid. And with a trembling voice, she spoke the words nobody expected. If Elena talks. She swallowed hard. The entire ballroom held its breath. Then she finished the sentence. This family will be destroyed. And in that moment, everyone realized there was a secret far worse than Daniel's betrayal. A secret powerful enough to terrify the mighty Margaret Whitmore herself. And I was the only person who knew the truth.
The ballroom buzzed with confusion. Whispers spread like wildfire. Guests exchanged nervous glances. Phones remained raised. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. What does that mean? Vanessa whispered. Her voice trembled. Margaret looked at me. Not with fear. Not with regret. With hatred. Pure hatred. And suddenly, I understood. She wasn't afraid of scandal. She wasn't afraid of humiliation. She was afraid of the truth. Daniel immediately grabbed his mother's arm. Hard. Stop talking. His voice cracked with panic. But it was already too late. The pieces were finally falling into place. For months, I had blamed Daniel alone. For months, I had believed he was the only monster. But now I saw the truth. The apartment fire plan wasn't his idea alone. His mother was involved. Margaret Whitmore had helped him. I stared directly into her eyes. Cold. Unblinking. You wanted me dead too. Gasps filled the ballroom. Several guests stepped backward. A woman dropped her champagne glass. The sound shattered the silence. Margaret's lips trembled. Her hands shook. That's not true. But guilt lived clearly inside her eyes. Everyone could see it. Everyone. Slowly, I reached into my apron pocket. The room watched every movement. Every breath. Every second. Then I removed my phone. Daniel's face instantly drained of color. No. The single word barely escaped his lips. I pressed play. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, his voice echoed through the silent ballroom. Clear. Undeniable. Terrifying. She's weak already. Soon the apartment fire story will be believable. The room exploded with gasps. Oh my God! Did he really say that? Vanessa covered her mouth. Tears instantly filled her eyes. But the recording wasn't finished. A second voice followed. Margaret's voice. Cold. Calculated. Heartless. No evidence must remain. Screams erupted throughout the ballroom. People stumbled backward. Guests stared at the Whitmore family as if they were strangers. As if they were monsters. Daniel suddenly lunged toward me. His face twisted with rage. You ruined everything. Before he could reach me, security rushed forward. 3 guards grabbed him immediately. Let me go. He struggled wildly. Let me go. But nobody was listening anymore. The truth was finally out. Vanessa stared at him with horror. Absolute horror. Her entire body shook. You planned to kill her? Daniel's eyes widened. It was just talk. His voice sounded desperate now. Pathetic. Weak. It was only talk. But nobody believed him. Not anymore. Not after hearing the recording. Not after seeing the panic in his eyes. Richard Laurent stepped forward. His face was dark with fury. The powerful businessman looked ready to explode. You manipulated my daughter. His voice was low. Dangerously low. Into marrying a criminal. The words hit Daniel like a punch. Margaret suddenly collapsed into a nearby chair. The elegant mask she had worn for years finally shattered. No confidence. No arrogance. No control. Only fear remained. Tears filled her eyes. I did it for my son. She whispered weakly. I laughed. A bitter, broken laugh. The kind that comes from years of pain. Years of betrayal. Years of surviving. You tried to erase me for your son. Margaret lowered her head. She couldn't deny it. She couldn't defend it. Because she knew I was right. Vanessa's hands shook violently. She looked from Daniel to Margaret, then back to me. Her entire world had collapsed within a single hour. How could you do this? Tears streamed down her face. How could all of you do this? Nobody answered. Because there was no answer. Nothing could justify what they had done. Nothing. Then suddenly, a new voice echoed from the entrance. Cold. Sharp. Familiar. Because this family destroys anyone who becomes inconvenient. Every head turned. The ballroom fell silent once again. A man stood near the entrance. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Serious. His expression was unreadable. But his eyes carried years of anger, years of secrets, years of pain. Daniel froze instantly. The color disappeared from his face. His lips parted. Michael. The name spread through the crowd like a shockwave. Michael Whitmore. Daniel's older brother. The son who vanished years ago. The brother nobody talked about. The man connected to a mysterious family scandal that had never been explained. Margaret looked absolutely terrified. More terrified than she had looked all night. Her breathing became uneven. You shouldn't be here. Michael smiled. A cold smile. A dangerous smile. Then he looked directly at me. I came because Elena finally deserves the truth. A chill ran through the ballroom. Even the guests seemed afraid to breathe. Because everyone understood something in that moment. The recording. The lies. The fake death. The ruined wedding. Those weren't the biggest secrets. Not even close. There was something much darker hidden inside the Whitmore family. Something powerful enough to make Margaret Whitmore tremble. Something dangerous enough to make Michael return after years of silence. And as he took his first step toward the center of the ballroom, I realized this was no longer about betrayal. It was no longer about revenge. It was no longer about a wedding. This had become a family war. And the most terrifying battle hadn't even begun yet. Michael walked slowly toward the center of the ballroom. Every guest watched in complete silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the air felt heavy. The wedding had become something else entirely. A battlefield. A courtroom. A graveyard for secrets. Daniel stared at his older brother. His jaw tightened. His fists clenched. You disappeared. Michael laughed softly. A sad laugh. A tired laugh. The laugh of a man who had carried pain for far too long. No. He shook his head slowly. Mother erased me. A wave of whispers swept through the crowd. Margaret immediately stood from her chair. Her body trembled. That's enough. But Michael didn't even look at her. Instead, his eyes found mine. And suddenly, a forgotten memory returned. A memory buried beneath years of heartbreak. I tried to warn you years ago, Michael said quietly. My heart skipped. Warn me. Then I remembered. My wedding reception. The music. The dancing. The happiness. And Michael standing alone near the bar. He had leaned close and whispered something strange. Something I never understood. Be careful around this family. At the time, I thought he was drunk. I thought he was bitter. I thought he was jealous. But now, I realized the truth. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't bitter. He was terrified. Vanessa stepped forward slowly. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. What happened to you? Michael loosened his tie. His eyes darkened. The room held its breath. Then he said something that sent chills through everyone. Daniel isn't the first person Mother taught to destroy people. Margaret's face turned ghostly white. Stop! Her scream echoed across the ballroom. But Michael continued. Relentless. Unstoppable. Years of silence were finally breaking free. I fell in love with a waitress once. My chest tightened immediately. The room grew quieter. If that was even possible. A poor girl named Clara. Margaret closed her eyes, as if hearing the name physically hurt her. Michael swallowed hard, then continued. She became pregnant. Gasps erupted around the ballroom. Several guests exchanged shocked looks. Vanessa covered her mouth. Richard Lauron looked stunned. But Michael wasn't finished. Not even close. His voice began to tremble. Not with fear. With grief. The kind of grief that never truly leaves. Mother told me Clara abandoned me. His eyes filled with tears. For years, I believed her. A painful silence followed. Then he looked directly at Margaret. And years later, I discovered the truth. Margaret lowered her head, unable to meet his eyes. Michael's voice cracked. Clara never abandoned me. Tears streamed down his face. The crowd stood frozen, listening, heartbroken. She died during childbirth. His voice broke completely. After being thrown out onto the street, the ballroom exploded with horror. Oh my God! No, that's impossible. Several guests wiped tears from their eyes. Even strangers felt the weight of his pain. Margaret whispered weakly, I was protecting this family. Michael turned toward her slowly. The disgust in his eyes was impossible to hide. Protecting this family? His voice thundered through the room. You destroyed innocent lives because you worship money. Margaret flinched, as if the truth itself had struck her. Then Michael turned toward Daniel. The silence became unbearable. And you? Daniel lifted his chin defiantly. Michael's voice hardened. You became exactly like her. Daniel finally snapped. His face twisted with anger. You think you're better than me? The brothers stared at each other, years of resentment burning between them. Then Michael answered quietly, a response far more powerful than a scream. No. He paused, his eyes filled with sadness. But at least I learned guilt. The words hit harder than any punch. Daniel looked away first. Vanessa slowly backed away from him. One step, then another, as if she were finally seeing the monster hiding behind the charming smile. The man she planned to marry. The man she thought she loved. The man she never truly knew. I watched everything unfold in stunned silence. My thoughts spiraled. For years, I blamed myself. For years, I wondered what I had done wrong. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I wasn't pretty enough. Maybe I wasn't successful enough. Maybe losing our baby changed everything. Maybe my sadness pushed him away. Maybe. But standing there now, I finally understood. None of it was my fault. None of it. My weakness didn't create Daniel's cruelty. My heartbreak didn't create his lies. My miscarriage didn't create his betrayal. Cruelty already lived inside him, long before I ever met him. Then suddenly, Michael reached inside his coat. The crowd tensed. Slowly, carefully, he removed a thick envelope. Its edges were worn, its corners bent with age. Then he held it out toward me. These belong to you. I frowned. My hands trembled. What is it? Michael's expression softened. Letters. Confused, I took the envelope. The moment I opened it, my heart stopped. Inside were dozens of unopened letters. Dozens. Every one addressed to me. My name, my address, my future, all trapped inside that envelope. I opened the first letter. A hospital approval. I opened another. A fertility treatment confirmation. Another. An adoption acceptance notice. Another. A specialist appointment. Another. A second adoption review. Another. And another. And another. My hands began shaking violently. My breathing became uneven. The room blurred around me. Every opportunity. Every chance. Every hope. Every possibility. Gone. Stolen. Hidden. Buried. Not by fate. Not by bad luck. By Daniel. Tears streamed down my face. Uncontrollably. Painfully. I looked up at him. The man I had loved for 10 years. The man I trusted with my entire heart. My voice cracked. You stole my future. The room fell silent. Daniel said nothing. Not a single word. No excuse. No denial. No explanation. Nothing. And somehow, that silence confessed everything. More than words ever could. I stared at him. And at that moment, something inside me finally died. Not love. Love had already died months ago. Not trust. Trust was already buried. No. What died was mercy. The last piece of mercy I still carried for Daniel Whitmore. And once it was gone, there was nothing left to stop what came next. The wedding officially collapsed. The flowers remained. The music equipment remained. The decorations remained. But the celebration was dead. Completely dead. Guests began leaving in groups. Whispers followed them through the ballroom. Judgment. Shock. Disgust. Outside the hotel, chaos erupted. Leaked videos had already spread across social media. Reporters flooded the entrance. News vans lined the street. Cameras flashed relentlessly. The scandal had become national news. But I stayed. Because I wasn't finished. Not yet. Not even close. As the crowd slowly disappeared, I walked toward the service hallway near the hotel kitchens. For the first time all night, I was alone. Or so I thought. Elena. My body stiffened. I knew that voice. Daniel. I turned slowly. He stood at the end of the hallway. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hair was disheveled. His face looked exhausted. Desperate. Broken. But not because of guilt. Because he had been exposed. You embarrassed me. The words hung in the air. For a moment, I simply stared at him. Then I laughed. A cold laugh. A painful laugh. You embarrassed yourself. His jaw tightened. I took a step closer. You tried to erase me. Daniel rubbed his face. Frustration filled his eyes. You don't understand what pressure does to people. I stared at him in disbelief. Pressure? That was his excuse. After everything? I shook my head slowly. No. My voice was calm. Dangerously calm. Pressure doesn't create evil. I paused, watching his expression change. It reveals it. The silence between us became unbearable. Then suddenly, Daniel grabbed my wrist. Hard. Too hard. His desperation was turning into anger. You think exposing me changes anything? His voice echoed through the empty hallway. I looked down at his hand, then slowly removed it. Without fear. Without hesitation. Without mercy. Yes. Daniel's breathing became heavier. His eyes searched my face, looking for weakness. Looking for the woman who once loved him. The woman he could manipulate. The woman he could control. Then he leaned closer. His voice softened. You still love me. The words hit me like a punch. Not because they were true. Because once, they had been. There was a time when I would have forgiven him anything. A time when I would have defended him. A time when losing him felt worse than death. But that woman no longer existed. She died the day he buried her with lies. I looked directly into his eyes. And for the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as my husband. Not as my soulmate. Not as the love of my life. Just a selfish man terrified of losing power. Terrified of losing money. Terrified of losing control. My voice barely rose above a whisper. Yet it hit him harder than any scream. No. I paused. The pain in my chest felt strangely distant now. I mourned you already. The words shattered something inside him. For the first time that night, Daniel looked hurt. Not angry. Not defensive. Hurt. Real hurt. As if he had finally realized there was no path back. No forgiveness. No second chance. Nothing. And strangely, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No sadness. No love. Nothing. Because indifference is the graveyard of love. I turned around and walked away. Without looking back. Without stopping. Without regret. Because revenge isn't always about destroying someone. Sometimes revenge means surviving beautifully after they tried to destroy you. Sometimes revenge means refusing to break. That night, I returned to my tiny apartment. The apartment Daniel once called temporary. The apartment he thought represented failure. I packed my belongings slowly. A few clothes. A few photographs. A few memories. For months, I had feared this moment. I expected loneliness. I expected grief. I expected emptiness. Instead, I found something surprising. Hope. Small. Fragile. But real. For the first time in months, the future didn't terrify me. It excited me. But hope alone wasn't enough. I wanted justice. Real justice. And justice was already coming. The next morning, every television channel carried the story. Every newspaper. Every website. Every social media platform. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire wedding scandal. Man marries second woman while first wife lives. Whitmore family accused of murder plot. The public reaction was immediate. Merciless. Daniel's company's stock began crashing. Investors panicked. Business partners disappeared. Contracts were canceled. Millions vanished overnight. The Whitmore empire wasn't just shaking. It was collapsing. And then came the biggest surprise of all. A phone call. One I never expected. Richard Lauron requested a private meeting. When I arrived at his office, my heart raced. The building overlooked the entire city. Power. Money. Influence. Everything Daniel had spent his life chasing. But what surprised me most wasn't Richard. It was Vanessa. She sat quietly beside him. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Dark circles rested beneath them. She looked exhausted. Heartbroken. Lost. The moment she saw me, she stood. Immediately, I prepared myself for anger. For blame. For accusations. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry." I blinked, certain I had heard her wrong. "What?" A tear rolled down her cheek. "I didn't know about you." Her voice cracked. "He told me you died." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I saw it. The truth. She wasn't my enemy. She never had been. She was another victim. Another woman manipulated by the same man. Another life damaged by Daniel Whitmore. Richard folded his hands. His expression remained calm. "My daughter wants to help you." I frowned. "Why?" Vanessa lowered her eyes. Then she answered softly. "Because he lied to both of us." The room fell silent. Then Richard reached across his desk. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed a thick folder toward me. My stomach tightened. "What is this?" Richard's expression hardened instantly. The kindness vanished. Only determination remained. Evidence. I opened the folder, and my blood ran cold. Financial records. Secret bank accounts. Forgery documents. illegal transfers, fraud, embezzlement, betrayal on a scale I couldn't even comprehend. Page after page, crime after crime, lie after lie. My hands trembled. I looked up slowly. What am I looking at? Richard's eyes locked onto mine. Cold, sharp, certain. Then he delivered the sentence that changed everything. The evidence that will destroy Daniel completely. Silence filled the room. Heavy, dangerous, final. And suddenly, my revenge became much bigger than heartbreak. Much bigger than betrayal. Much bigger than a ruined wedding. This wasn't about exposing a cheating husband anymore. This was about bringing down an empire. And the war had only just begun. Vanessa and I sat together for hours. At first, the silence between us felt uncomfortable. Strange. Awkward. Painful. The room was quiet, but our thoughts were loud. She was the woman Daniel chose over me. And I was the ghost who haunted her wedding. The woman he claimed was dead. The woman he tried to erase. For a long time, neither of us knew what to say. What words could possibly exist after so much betrayal? After so many lies? After so much damage? But slowly, something unexpected happened. The walls between us began to fall. Not all at once. Little by little. Brick by brick. Pain has a strange way of recognizing itself. And eventually, we began understanding each other. Vanessa stared down at her hands. Her voice was barely a whisper. He told me you were unstable. I smiled sadly. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. He told me I was worthless. Vanessa's eyes immediately filled with tears. The guilt on her face was heartbreaking. He told me I saved him. I nodded slowly. My chest tightened. He told me I ruined him. The silence that followed felt enormous. Heavy. Crushing. Vanessa suddenly covered her face. A sob escaped her lips. We were both manipulated. Her voice cracked completely. And for the first time, neither of us tried to be strong. Neither of us pretended. Neither of us hid our pain. Because the truth was finally impossible to ignore. For years, women are taught to compete, to compare, to fight over men, to blame each other. But the real villain often stands between them, smiling, lying, pulling the strings. Daniel had turned us into enemies before we ever met. And now we were sitting together, discovering we had suffered the same nightmare, just from different sides. Richard Laurent remained silent for a while. Then he leaned forward. His expression became serious. There is something else you both need to know. The room immediately grew tense. Richard opened several files. Page after page. Documents. Contracts. Financial statements. Evidence. Cold, undeniable evidence. Daniel's betrayal went far beyond relationships. Far beyond marriage. Far beyond love. Richard looked directly at Vanessa, then at me, and quietly revealed the truth. Daniel secretly borrowed millions. Vanessa froze. What? Richard nodded grimly. He used your future inheritance as collateral. The color disappeared from Vanessa's face. No. Her voice trembled. Richard continued. Every word felt like another bomb exploding. If the marriage succeeded, Daniel would gain partial access to Laurent family investments. The room fell silent. Vanessa stared into space, trying to process the horror, trying to understand that even her love had been used as a business strategy, a financial transaction, a trap. Richard closed the file. If the truth remained hidden, he would become incredibly wealthy. His eyes hardened. But now, he paused. A faint smile appeared. He loses everything. Vanessa looked shattered. Absolutely shattered. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I loved him. The words broke something inside me. Because I understood exactly how they felt. I reached across the table. Gently. Carefully. And whispered. So did I. Vanessa looked up. Our eyes met. And suddenly, everything changed. That single sentence connected us. Not as rivals. Not as enemies. Not as two women fighting over the same man. But as survivors. Two women who had escaped the same monster. Together. Days later, the consequences finally began. Investigators officially opened fraud cases against Daniel. News channels covered every development. Every accusation. Every revelation. Every scandal. Margaret Whitmore hired expensive lawyers. The best money could buy. But money couldn't repair public opinion. Not this time. The public hated them now. The internet exploded with reactions. Millions watched the wedding videos. Millions shared them. Millions judged them. The Whitmore name became toxic overnight. And somehow, I became a symbol. People online gave me a nickname, the waitress wife. At first, I hated it. Then something unexpected happened. Messages began arriving. Hundreds. Then thousands. Women from around the world shared their stories. Stories of betrayal. Stories of manipulation. Stories of humiliation. Stories of surviving impossible heartbreak. One woman wrote, "He convinced everyone I was crazy." Another wrote, "He made me believe everything was my fault." Another said, "I thought I was alone." Reading those messages changed me, because I realized something important. Heartbreak isn't rare. Heartbreak is universal. The details change. The faces change. But pain speaks the same language everywhere. One evening, several weeks later, there was a knock at my apartment door. When I opened it, Michael stood there. His expression looked heavy, burdened, like he was carrying years of sorrow. In his hand sat a small wooden box, carefully preserved, protected, treasured. I frowned. "What's this?" Michael looked down at the box, then back at me. His voice softened. "Clara's diary." The words hit me immediately. My stomach tightened. My hands trembled as I accepted the box. Slowly, carefully, I opened it. Inside sat a worn leather journal. The pages had yellowed with age. The corners were folded. Some pages carried faint tear stains. I opened to the first entry. Then another. Then another. And my heart shattered. Page after page told the story of a young woman desperately trying to survive. A young woman desperate to be loved. Desperate to be accepted. Desperate to belong. Desperate not to lose her child. Each entry felt more heartbreaking than the last. I kept reading, unable to stop, until I reached the final page. The final entry. The final words. My hands began shaking. The room suddenly felt cold. Very cold. I read the sentence aloud. "If anything happens to me." My voice cracked. The Whitmore family did this. Silence filled the apartment. Michael closed his eyes. Pain flashed across his face. Years of regret. Years of guilt. Years of grief. Tears filled his eyes. I couldn't save her. The confession hung in the air. Raw. Painful. Honest. I looked up slowly. Then I shook my head. "No." Michael opened his eyes. I held Clara's diary tightly against my chest. "But maybe we can save others." For the first time that night, hope appeared in his expression. Small, fragile, but real. That night we made a decision. Not out of revenge. Not out of hatred. Not out of anger. Out of responsibility. We would expose every secret the Whitmore family buried. Every victim. Every lie. Every betrayal. Every crime. No more silence. No more fear. No more forgotten lives. Because pain can destroy a person, or transform them. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's turning your suffering into justice. And our fight was only beginning. A month later, Margaret Whitmore invited me to dinner. Alone. No lawyers. No reporters. No family. Just the two of us. Most people would have refused. Most people would have stayed far away. But I went. Because powerful people become dangerous when cornered. And because deep down, I knew there were still answers waiting for me. Answers buried beneath years of lies. Years of manipulation. Years of pain. I needed to see her one last time. The Whitmore mansion stood beneath a dark evening sky. As grand as ever. As intimidating as ever. Massive chandeliers. Marble floors. Golden walls. Priceless artwork. Luxury everywhere. Yet the house felt strangely empty. Cold. Lifeless. A palace without a soul. There was no warmth. No laughter. No love. Just wealth. And silence. The kind of silence that follows destruction. Margaret waited alone inside the dining room. The moment I saw her, I barely recognized her. She looked older. Much older. Her shoulders sagged. The confidence that once filled every room had vanished. Fear changes people quickly. And Margaret Whitmore was terrified. She stood slowly when I entered. "You came." Her voice sounded fragile. Almost broken. I pulled out a chair. Carefully. Quietly. I wanted answers. Margaret nodded. Slowly. Painfully. Dinner sat untouched between us. Elegant dishes. Expensive wine. Perfect presentation. Neither of us touched any of it. Because neither of us came for food. We came for truth. Several minutes passed in silence. The ticking clock echoed through the room. Finally, Margaret spoke. You think I'm evil? I stared at her. My expression never changed. Aren't you? The question landed like a knife. Margaret flinched. Then something unexpected happened. Tears filled her eyes. Real tears. Not manipulation. Not performance. Pain. Raw pain. For the first time, she looked less like a villain, and more like a frightened old woman. I grew up poor, she whispered. Her hands trembled as she spoke. I watched my father die because we couldn't afford medicine. I remained silent, listening, watching, waiting. Margaret stared down at the table, lost in memories. When I married into wealth, her voice cracked. I promised myself I would never lose security again. A tear rolled down her cheek, then another. And when Daniel was born, she swallowed hard. I taught him the same lesson. The room felt heavy. Every word carried years of regret. Then she looked directly at me. And for the first time, I saw shame. Real shame. Daniel became obsessed with success. Her eyes closed. Just like me. The silence stretched between us. Then she whispered, I created the monster that destroyed you. The words echoed inside my chest. For a brief moment, I saw her differently. Not as the terrifying woman who controlled everyone. Not as the powerful matriarch. But as someone who had spent her entire life running from fear. A woman consumed by insecurity. Consumed by survival. Consumed by money. But understanding someone's pain does not erase the damage they caused. Pain is not an excuse for cruelty. And cruelty is exactly what she chose. I looked directly at her. My voice remained steady. You tried to erase me. Margaret lowered her head and quietly answered. Yes. The honesty shocked me. No excuses. No lies. No denial. Just truth. A terrible truth. I thought removing you would save my family. I stood slowly. The chair scraped against the floor. The sound echoed through the room. But your family was already broken. Margaret closed her eyes, as if hearing those words physically hurt. Then suddenly, she whispered, There's one more secret. My stomach tightened instantly. The room seemed smaller. The air seemed thinner. My heart began pounding. What secret? Margaret looked away, toward the fireplace, toward the dancing flames, anywhere except at me. Then she spoke. 3 words. 3 words that changed everything. Your miscarriage. My entire body froze. Every muscle, every breath, every thought. The room vanished. What about it? My voice barely existed. A whisper. A prayer. A warning. Margaret began crying harder. Violently. Uncontrollably. Her shoulders shook. Her breathing became uneven. Then her voice cracked. It wasn't natural. Everything stopped. The clock. The room. The world. No. 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 My mind rejected the words immediately. My heart refused to believe them. What did you say? Margaret covered her face. Tears poured through her fingers. It wasn't natural. My breathing became ragged. Uneven. Desperate. Fear gripped my chest. A terrifying fear. The kind that arrives just before a nightmare becomes real. Then Margaret said the words that shattered my soul. I paid a doctor. She sobbed. To give you medication that weakened the pregnancy. Crash. The glass slipped from my hand. It shattered across the marble floor. The sound exploded through the dining room. But I barely heard it, because something inside me had broken. Something deeper. Something permanent. The room spun. My vision blurred. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't move. Years. Years of guilt. Years of self-blame. Years of waking up in the middle of the night, wondering what I did wrong. Years of believing my body failed my child. Years of believing I failed my child. All of it. A lie. I stared at Margaret. Horrified. Disgusted. Broken. My lips trembled. You. My voice cracked. You killed my baby? Margaret collapsed into tears. Completely shattered. I was afraid. She cried desperately. I was afraid a child would trap Daniel in a poor marriage forever. The words hit me like a bullet. A child. My baby. A life that never had a chance. Taken away before it could even begin. Because of greed. Because of status. Because of obsession. Pain exploded through my chest so violently I thought I might collapse. I pressed a hand against my heart, trying to breathe, trying to survive the unbearable weight of the truth. Every memory suddenly changed. Every hospital visit. Every tear. Every prayer. Every sleepless night. Everything. Every memory suddenly changed. Every hospital visit. Every tear. Every prayer. Every sleepless night. Everything. She stole motherhood from me. She stole my future. She stole my child. And then she let me blame myself for years that I slowly stepped backward. One step. Then another. Then another. Margaret reached toward me. Desperate. Begging. Elena, please. I recoiled instantly. As if her touch would burn me. Don't touch me. The words emerged cold. Empty. Dead. Even I barely recognized my own voice. Margaret broke down completely. Sobbing. Begging. Crying. But I felt nothing. Nothing. Not sympathy. Not forgiveness. Not understanding. Nothing. I turned away and walked toward the door. The woman behind me continued crying. But I never looked back. Not once. Outside, rain poured from the sky. Cold. Relentless. Merciless. The storm soaked my clothes within seconds. But I didn't care. I stood there beneath the rain. Alone, shaking. Destroyed. And for the first time in my life, I understood real hatred. Not anger. Not resentment. Not heartbreak. Hatred. The kind born from stolen years. The kind born from stolen children. The kind born from unforgivable truths. And standing there beneath the storm, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Margaret Whitmore had not just destroyed my past. She had declared war on my soul. And I would never be the same again. The collapse. The confession changed everything. Michael secretly recorded Margaret's admission. Within days, authorities reopened investigations connected to the Whitmore family. Doctors were questioned. Financial records exposed bribery. Former employees came forward. The empire finally began collapsing from the inside. Daniel called me constantly. Hundreds of missed calls. Messages. Begging. Threatening. Crying. I ignored them all. Then one night, he appeared outside my apartment. Rain soaked his expensive coat. He looked exhausted. Ruined. Elena, please. I opened the door slightly. What? His eyes looked red. I didn't know about the miscarriage. I stared at him silently. She never told me. Tears rolled down his face. I swear, for the first time, I believed him. Daniel was cruel. Selfish. Manipulative. But even he looked horrified by his mother's confession. He sank onto the apartment stairs. I loved our baby. My chest ached painfully. Because once, we really had loved each other. Or at least the versions of ourselves we used to be. Daniel covered his face. Everything is gone. I whispered quietly. Now you understand how I felt. He looked up desperately. Can you ever forgive me? The question lingered heavily between us. Forgiveness. Such a dangerous word. People think forgiveness means excusing pain. It doesn't. Forgiveness means refusing to let pain control your future forever. I looked at Daniel for a long time. Then I answered honestly. One day maybe. Hope flickered briefly in his eyes. Then I finished speaking. But never enough to love you again. And that truth destroyed him completely. The courtroom overflowed with reporters. Cameras flashed constantly. People whispered everywhere. The Whitmore scandal had become national news. I sat quietly beside Vanessa while Daniel entered wearing a dark suit. But he no longer looked powerful. He looked exhausted. Destroyed. Margaret sat behind him silently. Her once perfect appearance had disappeared. No diamonds. No confidence. No control. Just fear. The prosecutor presented evidence for hours. Fraud. Bribery. Forgery. Financial theft. Witness after witness testified. Then came the hardest moment. I walked toward the witness stand. Daniel looked at me desperately. For 1 second, I remembered the young man I once danced with inside our tiny apartment kitchen. The man who kissed my forehead when we were broke. The man who cried with happiness when we first learned I was pregnant. That man once existed. And losing him was the first heartbreak. The second heartbreak was discovering who he truly became. I sat down slowly. The courtroom became silent. The prosecutor asked softly, Mrs. Whitmore, can you explain what happened the night you discovered the affair? My hands trembled. But I spoke. I told them everything. The loneliness. The manipulation. The messages. The apartment fire plan. The miscarriage. The betrayal. And as I spoke, Daniel cried quietly. Not loud dramatic tears. Small broken tears. The kind people cry when they finally understand the damage they caused. When my testimony ended, the prosecutor asked one final question. Why did you choose to expose him publicly instead of disappearing quietly? I looked directly at Daniel. Then I answered, because silence protects cruel people. The courtroom remained silent for several seconds. Then I stepped down. Vanessa squeezed my hand proudly. Later that afternoon, the judge delivered the verdict. Daniel Whitmore was found guilty of fraud and conspiracy. Margaret Whitmore faced criminal investigation for medical bribery connected to my miscarriage. Reporters rushed outside immediately. The Whitmore empire collapsed completely. But strangely, I felt no celebration, only sadness. Because revenge never returns what was stolen. It only stops the stealing from continuing. Outside the courthouse, Daniel approached me one final time. Police officers waited nearby. He looked at me silently for several moments. Then he whispered, "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." Tears filled my eyes unexpectedly. Because years ago, he was the best thing that ever happened to me too. But some people destroy the very things they love. Daniel's voice broke. "If I could go back." "You can't." The sentence came out softer than I expected. He nodded slowly. Then he reached into his pocket. My old wedding ring. The ring I left on the kitchen table months ago. "I kept it," he whispered. Seeing that ring nearly shattered me. Because despite everything, part of me still mourned our lost future. The children we never had. The home we never built. The love that died slowly between lies. Daniel placed the ring gently into my hand. "I'm sorry." Real remorse finally lived inside his eyes. But remorse arrives too late for many people. I closed my fingers around the ring, then whispered quietly, "Goodbye, Daniel." Police escorted him away. And as I watched him disappear into the distance, I cried, not because I wanted him back, but because some endings hurt even when they are necessary.
6 months later, spring sunlight poured through large studio windows. Children laughed around colorful paintings. My hands moved gently across a canvas while teaching an art class. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Real peace. Not happiness built on illusion. Not survival. Peace. The walls of the studio were covered with paintings created by women rebuilding their lives. Some escaped abusive marriages. Some survived betrayal. Some survived grief. Every painting carried pain, but also strength. Vanessa entered quietly carrying coffee. She smiled. "Your students adore you." I laughed softly. They adore paint on the walls more. We had become unlikely friends. After everything, we opened a foundation together supporting women escaping emotional abuse. Pain transformed into purpose. Michael helped too. He finally found Clara's daughter, a little girl raised in foster care. Watching them reunite healed something inside all of us. Life remained imperfect, but honest. And honesty feels beautiful after years of lies. One afternoon, I received a letter from Daniel. My hands trembled slightly